I'm AP Talent, and this is Roleplay Culture. Is shooting a goblin with a cannon overrated? Maybe. So we discussed underrated feats for D&D, and now it's time to stick our toes in the muddy end of the pond and look at some of the overrated examples. As a quick primer, feats are an alternative choice to ability score increases that accompany a character class every 4 levels. They give an assortment of abilities, which can include the half-feat versions that give a +1 to an ability score, and a few lesser features. It's important to remember that feats are an optional feature in D&D. They are not included in the core rules, and your DM is not obligated to allow them. They may be in the player's handbook, but they don't have to be at your DM's table. Most DMs do allow feats, but if yours doesn't, don't give them grief. So here are 3 overrated feats for D&D 5e, and maybe a few suggestions to use in their place. How good is your aim? Well, we're coming out of the gate swinging with Sharpshooter. For simplicity, we could also lump in Great Weapon Master into this as well, for many of the same reasons we're about to discuss. Sharpshooter gives 3 features. Attack at long range with weapons doesn't impose this disadvantage anymore. Those attacks also ignore 1/2 and 3/4 cover. And that thing that everyone is here for, -5 to attack for a +10 to damage. This feat has the capacity to output a massive amount of damage, and it can be incredibly game warping. At least on paper, anyway. Now, compared to its sister feat, Great Weapon Master, this is the better of the two. If you're taking Sharpshooter, then you're probably taking the archery fighting style, which will offset some of the attack penalty. Great Weapon Master does not have this and suffers even more problems. But even though Sharpshooter is the better of the two, I still have a few issues with it. First is that this feat is somewhat narrow in who could best benefit from it. Unless you're a dedicated archer, it's not too useful to a wide variety of characters. Those other characters can take a different feat, fair enough, but my real issue is that -5 to attack. It's generally accepted that the Sharpshooter should be turned off at about AC 18. That hit and miss math starts to weigh against your damage around about then. But here's the thing. A hobgoblin, which is a very common monster to run into at even first level, has an AC of 18. That's a problem. Look, I'm not saying you shouldn't take this feat at all. Maybe just don't start with it. Instead, maybe choose the Piercer feat. This is a half feat that gives a +1 to strength or dex, which can round out one of those ability scores, probably dex. Once per turn, when you hit with an attack that deals piercing damage, you can reroll one of those damage dice. This is particularly good with rogues with all those sneak attack dice. And finally, when you crit with piercing damage, you add 1 additional damage dice to the total. Don't forget, this feat revolves around piercing damage, which doesn't limit itself to bows and crossbows. Short swords, rapiers, daggers, all benefit from it. Again, sure, you'll probably take Sharpshooter at some point, but start with this feat first. It can increase defense, attack bonus, and improve your damage output. It's also just a bit more of an interesting choice, to be honest. Show of hands. Who here is tired of elves? This friggin' feat. Elven Accuracy comes from Xanathar's Guide to Everything as a part of a collection of racial feats, most of which are pretty unknown and I think pretty underrated, except for this monstrosity. You get 2 features from this feat. First, +1 to dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Kind of weird that strength was left out, but I guess that's not what elves are known for. The other feature is that when you make an attack roll that utilizes the aforementioned ability scores with advantage, you roll 3 dice instead of 2. So it's basically triple advantage. I don't necessarily dislike this feat or even think it's overpowered, just overrated. First, there's an obvious restriction. You have to be a half-elf or an elf to take this feat. If you're not an elf character at creation, you can never take it. You also have to have some way to gain advantage, which can cause some problems at the table. Hey.
What?
Cast Fairy Fire to give me advantage.
No.
Normally, I encourage this sort of teamwork, but I can see this getting very annoying for other members at the table who are constantly being nagged about giving advantage so the player can constantly benefit from this feat. Or there are those that try to give themselves advantage by Frankensteining their character builds to make it work. And it can be a problem too. I mean, just a warlock build that stands in their own darkness with Devil Sight to give advantage can be kind of disruptive. The darkness spell is indiscriminate and can really mess up the other players at the table. It encourages a kind of play that I'm not particularly fond of. We had enough darkness-cloaked warlocks in 3rd edition. Also, everybody and his brother is an elf of some sort now. I bet if we track the number of elven characters made after this feat released, we'd see a huge jump. I mean, there are other races out there too, you know. I really wish that the other racial feats were raised to this feat's level. It would make a much more diverse party composition. So, instead of this feat, maybe take Fey Touched. By no means is it underrated in choice or overrated in power. It's as strong as it reads. But at least it's honest about it. You get a +1 to Intelligence, Wisdom, or Charisma. You learn the Misty Step spell and 1 first level Divination or Enchantment spell, chosen from any spell list. You can cast these spells once for free and with your own spell slots. Some see this feat as a problem because it lets any character get strong attack spells like Hex or really warping spells like Silvery Barbs. But those spells are fun. And as long as you're honest with your players about, cheesing the game, I don't think it's a problem. Remember, your players want to have fun too. This feat also has no restrictions on it, unlike Elven Accuracy, which means there isn't going to be some mysterious boom in the elven population. And you can still have that little bit of fairy influence in your character. After all, you have been touched by the Fae. Tell me, punk, are you feeling lucky?
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
That's right, I'm saying it. Lucky is overrated. But before you break out the pitchforks and torches...
Sir, there's an unruly mob to see it.
Does it have an appointment?
Yes it does.
I phoned ahead.
I mean, it's overrated in a good way. This is one of the most banned feats in D&D, especially when paired with divination wizards. But you know what? I think it's a whole lot of fuss over nothing. You get 3 luck points to spend, and they come back on a long rest. What can you do with these points? Well, you can spend them, of course. When you make an attack roll ability check or a saving throw, you can spend a point and roll 1 additional d20. You can choose to do this after the roll, but before the result is revealed. And you get to choose which d20 is used. That distinction is important. So this is not a reroll, nor is it rolling with advantage. And with the way it's worded, if you were rolling with disadvantage, you could add a 3rd die to the mix and then pick the one you'd want, which is essentially turning disadvantage into super advantage. Which makes sense that someone lucky would turn their poor luck into good fortune. You can also spend a luck point to add another d20 to an attack directed at you, and then you can choose which die to use. So this can give you some added protection. So it sounds like a really cool feat, right? Yeah, it is. So what's the problem? The problem, the real problem, is that this feat is kind of overrated. And because of that, it is one of the most banned feats in D&D, especially with the divination wizard that we previously mentioned. And that sucks. I mean, it's cool, but it's not that cool. So yes, this feat is overrated. And that's a good thing. You only have 3 luck points, meaning you only use this feat 3 times a day. Sure, if you're only having 1, maybe 2 encounters a day, yeah, I mean, it could be a problem. But the Dungeon Master Guide suggests 6 to 8 encounters a day. Probably why this feat and others like it are designed this way. So that's what I do. Just remember, they don't all have to be in combat encounters. As long as the situation has some sort of consequence of failure, it's an encounter. So throw a few more encounters at your players and stop banning the feat. They don't know what happens if they fail that persuasion check to get past the little old lady blocking their way up the mountain pass. Maybe she doesn't give you a fresh baked muffin that she recently prepared. Or maybe she doesn't tell you about the blue dragon waiting to ambush travelers at the top. Players don't necessarily know what roles are important, what the consequences of failure are. So they may end up wasting their luck points. Or they'll hold on to them, looking for that perfect opportunity, and end up not spending them at all. So, yeah, the lucky feat. A lot of fun. Bit overrated. No need to ban it. And no need for a different recommendation either. The feat's fine the way it is, and absolutely worth taking. So there are my 3 overrated feats for D&D 5e, along with a few alternatives to pick instead. Please be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, smash that like button. Tell us below which feats you think are overrated. Check out our other videos here, and I'll see you in the parlor.